Well, good morning. I'm Alan Carroll. I've been with Esri about going on 3.5 years. After, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, working at National Geographic for many years, for the last dozen or so as chief cartographer there. And during that time, I got to know Esri very well and got to know and admire what GIS is all about and what the community this huge global community of GIS users is doing, which is just amazing stuff. But it's been kind of quiet behind the scenes, and it's always kind of bothered me that GIS wasn't accessible to more people, and that the data that community was using wasn't made available to broader audiences. And I'd let Jack Dangerman, who had become a pretty good friend, who's the founder and president of Esri, know about that, and that ultimately led to my making the jump from National Geographic to Esri, with the charge of creating these story maps with several ideas and goals in mind. One was just to help make GIS accessible, and the kind of content that's produced by ArcGIS, Esri software, available to broader audiences. But really to enable, more importantly, to enable lots of organizations to get their own geography-based stories out to broad audiences, whether those stories come from GIS data or not. If there's a strong location component, that's kind of what I'm all about, and my team and I. So I work out of the Roslyn office. It's a small R&D office, and I've got a small team there. And then Esri, which is headquartered in Redlands, California, has many people there, and we work pretty closely with some people at Esri headquarters. So what we do, and I'll show you our site soon, but what we do is we have a couple of main tasks. An ongoing effort is that my team here in the Washington area takes on a story every 2 weeks to a month or so. We'll kind of assign ourselves a story, or working in partnership with other nonprofits, or we've got an agreement to produce a monthly story with Smithsonian. We will just assign ourselves something, often our own, the topic's usually our own idea, but might be, again, in partnership with other organizations like Wildlife Conservation Society and National Audubon Society and others. And then we'll just work to develop a user experience that presents a topic with an interactive map as an important part of the storytelling, but that in combination with other multimedia content, text, photos, videos, audio. And so that's a lot of fun. We were developing our own stories, and the basic idea is we want to tell that particular story as well as we can, but sometimes, not all the time by any means, but sometimes before, during, and after that process of creating that story, we'll realize that we're creating a user experience that might be useful for other people. And so we take a subset of those stories and then develop them into these apps that we make available to a broad audience. Really, anybody who wants to use them. They're open source. They're available on GitHub. People can download them and customize them however they want. And the basic structure of these is two-part. One is the maps that we publish are hosted for the most part on ArcGIS Online, which is Esri's big shared internet resource. So there are hundreds and hundreds of organizations producing tens of thousands of maps that are on this resource, and we will often create our own maps and publish them there, share them publicly, and then essentially pour them into our web apps. So the second part is the web apps. So these little applications, almost entirely written in JavaScript, provide that kind of wrapper and user experience. I think the best way to describe it is just to show you. So I'll open a browser here. So our site is at storymaps.arcgis.com. And we've got this is our home page, obviously. We've got a gallery of featured stories, and of course we try to highlight topics of current interest. So just to jump to a really quick example, this is the Seattle Times used one of our apps or templates called Playlist to show to present a map of all the victims of the mudslide in Washington.
So did you guys produce this, or did Seattle Times?
Seattle Times did this completely on its own, and so they usually. Usually this. What did I do here? Let me just reload. Sorry, I'm using a PC and I'm a Mac person, and you'll forgive me if my clicking is sometimes errant. At any rate, our standard application uses presents a little summary and this playlist, as we call it, of thumbnails, and the Seattle Times customized it to show before and after imagery of the mudslide, and then mapped the homes of the victims of the slide and their status. So this is just a really kind of an ideal example of the kind of thing that the reason our applications exist and the kind of customization that we want people to do. But at any rate, back to our site, we've got this little. Sure. Okay. Just a second. All right. So the heart of our site is this list of apps. So we've got a slowly growing list of storytelling apps that are kind of organized around different ways of telling stories with maps. So we start by asking this question: what kind of story do you want to tell? And then we present our apps in these categories. So the first is sequential place-based narrative. So, and this is far and away our most popular application. It's called Map Tour, and it essentially, a lot of say city governments are using it to present walking tours of historic districts or show their capital improvement projects. I did the one in the little thumbnail that shows that's a walking tour of the National Mall. I did one when we were just developing the site. So each one of the our applications has its landing page that summarizes what the application is all about, links to a gallery, a filtered gallery that presents map tours that we produce, but also a wide community of users around the world. So as you can see, they're on all sorts of different topics, from what Senator Ron Wyden did in Oregon in January to public art in the city of St. Albert in Canada to a tour of Berlin, Germany. It just goes on and on. It's been great fun for us because in the last year or so we've had a big increase in the usage of our apps, and it's really fun essentially every day to be able to go search for stories and find some really interesting new uses. At any rate, that's our most popular story. And I'll come back in a few minutes to the way we make the applications available and how people use and build stories, but I'll just run through our apps very quickly first. So another category of storytelling is to present a curated list of points of interest. So in other words, these map tours are sequential. These are non-sequential. So short list is kind of the prime example in that category. And the idea here is, and I'll just go again quickly to an example, is to present this curated list of places in and around a destination. But they're not sequential. But they're organized into categories, and of course the author can determine what the categories are. In this case, it's just local sites and culture, architecture, and parks. And the neat thing several kind of cool things about this. One is that you can get a little summary screen that then can link to the website. And as you pan and zoom around the map, or go from neighborhood to neighborhood, the list of thumbnails updates to show just what's in the current map extent. So if you're in this area, and you only really want to see what's in this area, and that's what the app presents.
Is there auto translation for this?
No, there's not. one wishes, but so on to some other apps. We've also got the Countdown app presents a list in a kind of hierarchy, so you can use it. We've used it for, in this case, the 50 largest refugee camps in the world, or the 25 largest airports in the world, or things like that.
Do you have either of those as an example to show?
Sure, yeah.
Like refugee camps?
Sure. And it's a little bit out of date because it happened just as the Syria crisis was ramping up.
Okay.
But we'll go to the gallery and I'll find it for you. So we worked with the UN High Commissioner on Refugees, their office, to get the list. And basically what you do is you can click on one, find out some basic information about it,
right,
and then do satellite imagery of them. So at this point,
so right now, the information that you would have on them, you would have satellite imagery. What other geographic information or geographically related information would you have? Like, would you have anything on distribution or population distribution or anything like that, or density? Or
we don't in this case, but all of this, these apps can essentially accommodate whatever you want to put in. So this is driven off of a spreadsheet essentially. So whatever you decide to put in the spreadsheet can populate this box. The graph here, which I don't, in retrospect, don't think is all that impressive because the bars are about the same size, but that's kind of the point. It's a drive home to American viewers, at any rate, that these camps are big, and so we compare the population of the refugee camps to city, and so this one, with hosting Somali refugees, is about the size of Burlington, Vermont, just so people can kind of relate to it.
Okay.
So I think you get the idea.
Can you, with regard to, just trying to figure out with regard to, for somebody to look at that and try and have some type of conceptualize what that means, is there any way that you can zoom in any closer than that, or?
Well, it depends, of course, on the imagery. In a lot of these areas of the world, the imagery isn't very current or high resolution. But in this case, you can get a pretty good sense of the size and density of it.
Can you also tag like news stories or photos or something to these as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and that could be again just another field in the spreadsheet with a URL. That then would be included over here that would link you straight to that article. So that's the countdown.
Could I just ask one other question quickly?
Sure.
Okay, with regard to these right now, with each one of these, what we're talking about is a template which allows you to add certain amounts of information and probably structure that in different ways. But this is all going to be information that you're going to add into it. But is there any type of relationship between being able to draw, maybe comparisons between different camps, or is it just basically the display of the information?
Again, it really depends on.
It has the capacity to do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, these are various apps accommodate different types of storytelling. So, and of course our inventory of applications is far from complete. It's a work in progress.
Right.
But we are working to accommodate, some of the basic ways of telling stories with maps.
Okay.
And I'll tell you a little later about a work in progress that we're pretty excited about. So let's see. Let's go back. Back too far. So next on the list, I showed you playlists. That was the example from Washington State that the Seattle Times did. Then there are ways of comparing two or or more maps. And we've got, I'm going to jump down here. So if you want to make a quick comparison between two maps, these are actually the same application, two different versions of the same application, but we've got Swipe and Spyglass, and I think that they're pretty self-explanatory, that you can swipe back and forth between two maps to very quickly and easily compare two related phenomena. So this is showing the relationship in the U.S. between obesity and diabetes. So you can, and as you go back and forth across the map, the pop-up changes so that you're focusing on one topic or the other. Similarly, we did a Spyglass version. We feel that the Swipe is actually more. Oops, what happened here? Sorry. We feel the Spyglass is actually, the Swipe is actually more useful, but people love the Spyglass just because it's engaging. Let me go to the gallery here. So that even though it's a little bit gimmicky, people just love it. So we did, last August, we did several city maps for the Smithsonian comparing 19th century maps from the collection of David Rumsey, who's a wonderful map collector and technologist, with contemporary satellite images. So this is, obviously this is Washington, D.C., so you can see what the National Mall looked like, actually before the National Mall, and of course the whole area around Lincoln Memorial was just essentially a mud flat or a tidal wetland. We're fortunate to live in Washington in the 21st century rather than the 19th century. That was kind of a malarial swamp.
This would be cool to see on Swipe.
Yeah.
I don't happen to have one of this one, but I could go in, because I was the author of this map. If I was on my own computer, actually it would know I was the author, and I could go in. There'd be a little edit button up here, and I could actually go in, and with about 3 mouse clicks, I could change it from the Spyglass to the Swipe.
Is that just a matter of changing the app then that you chose?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it keeps the information then? But it just can feed off the same information, and you can change the app and use the same information on a different app?
Well, actually, it's a little more complicated than that, except with the Swipe and Spyglass, because they're two configurations of the same app. It's really just a button or two.
Gotcha.
But with the others, you'd have to go back and get a web map ID, or go back to the spreadsheet and incorporate it that way. Anyway, let's go back. So that's Spyglass. And as I mentioned, those went viral. The New York City map is still on our top 10 list of most popular maps. And by the way, I was showing that to my daughter, who's a freshman in college, who has a good friend at Columbia. And she said, let's look at Columbia University. So we zoomed in Columbia and moved the Spyglass over it, and it said lunatic asylum. So that's back around 1850, apparently it was a different kind of institution. So she got a huge kick out of that.
That's funny.
Okay, let's see, where are we? Sorry, just a second. And then we have ways of comparing two or more maps. And again, these are two different versions of the same application. So we've got it's very sensitive. Sometimes I don't mean to click, and it does. So again, if you've got several related maps, you can compare either using a tabbed format, in which case the tabs are across here, and you click and you see the summary in the side panel. But a slightly more engaging version is this side accordion. So you can go from map to map, and these numbered tabs kind of open up for you to give a greater description. And this is kind of cool. This is a guy who works for the city government in Oregon, he's a motorcyclist, So he's got his own little startup company called Twisty Roads, and he's done a GIS analysis of how twisty roads are within a certain area, and then he presents, he tells riders where to go on these roads.
That's the kind of query you can do with GIS.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the kind of thing that you can.
So I love this example for that reason.
Right.
I think you said that's all could go on top of that.
Well, you know, one of the first things we did just was playing around, this is the environmental studies, was to look at areas that had certain types of deciduous trees, which meant that in the fall there was a certain leaf coverage. And there's a determination of the slope at which a leafy slope becomes dangerous to walk on.
Oh my
And
God.
you could actually do this overlay and see all these areas that were dangerous to walk on in the fall because of their slope determination.
And the problem with that is probably people still walk on those areas.
Oh, yeah. And of course, if you really want to get technical, you have to add in, moisture levels and things like that.
So I'm signing into my ArcGIS Online account to show you a couple of things. So I'm going to go to a map tour that I built to show you how the builder functions work for some of our apps. So and while I'm getting there, let me explain that when we produce one of these user experiences, we start with a kind of custom effort, as I mentioned, and then we go back and we make it more robust. So the developers on my team might pretty extensively rewrite the code, and then we make it available on GitHub and via our website, and people can download the whole package and then go into a config section. We have a README file that explains this, and customize and publish the app on their own servers. But that's still kind of complicated. It doesn't require GIS expertise directly, but it still means you have to kind of mess around in JavaScript code. So the next phase we go through is to and further enhance the apps and incorporate builder functions directly into the application. And I'll show you what that means. So I took, my family and I took a vacation in Cornwall in England last August with some British friends. And of course, because I'm addicted to this stuff, I can't help but make tours of my own experiences. So I created this tour, and you can just, this was a day, we stayed at this wonderful little house on an estuary in Cornwall, and we took a hike during a day, and I kept a GPS track, and I was able to upload that into a web map, and publish my own, publish my photos into it. So the way I did it was I started from scratch. Well, I started with a map, but here, because I'm the author, you saw that switch to builder mode function. So you cut I'm the only one that can see that, but now I'm in the builder function, and I can do a bunch of things to the story. So I can just click on any one of these to change the if I realized I needed an apostrophe there, I can add that. I can change the overall title or subtitle. I can organize the photos just by dragging and dropping to change the order. I can hide or delete photos. I can also import photos, and this is what I did from the beginning. So I uploaded my photos to Flickr, and then went to Flickr within the Builder app and essentially pulled those photos down. And if they were taken with my iPhone, they would have been, which I lost in New York, by the way, yesterday, they would have been already geotagged, and they'd automatically populate a map. But in this case, they weren't geotagged, so there's once I downloaded them, there's just a simple drag and drop function, and you can move the icons around. This app can also accommodate YouTube videos.
So when you were doing the tracking with regard to showing the route that you were taking, was that something where you actually had some type of a GPS device on you, or is your iPhone enough to do that kind of thing?
There's an app. There are several apps for iPhone and of course Android phones that enable you to keep a GPS track. I use one called Motion GPS.
All right.
And it saves a GPX file And so when I go back to my home or office, I open up my ArcGIS Online account, just literally drag that GPX file onto the map, and the track is there. So that's how I did it. So at any rate, you get the idea here that this our goal for these apps is to make them really, really easy and kind of intuitive and self-explanatory to use. I can also customize it in other ways. So there's a very similar function for the spyglass versus swipe. So there are two layout options for this. So if I want to switch to this layout, I just select it, click apply, and now the media window is moved over to the right, and the map image kind of takes up the whole background.
Question. How many map templates do you have? Because there's some cool, I saw some cool, old-timey ones, and you obviously have the satellite imagery. How many map templates are there to pick from, and how is that organized?
Well, in a real way, there are thousands. It sometimes can be confusing because it can be difficult sometimes to find and kind of separate the wheat from the chaff. But we've got about 9 base maps that are universally and easily accessible. So one thing I can do here.
So are those thousands available, though, even though you have just the base map?
Yeah, well, if you have an ArcGIS Online subscription, you can essentially search and find and discover all sorts of maps that have been shared. And some of those, a lot of them are, again, so the results of some kind of GIS analysis that people have shared publicly. And they're also, you can also create and save and share mashups of various sorts. Take, say, a population density map from one place and a religion map from somewhere else, and kind of glom them together and share them. So yeah, there's this whole kind of ecosystem of maps out there that you can tap and use. What's a little bit difficult is a lot of people are sharing things that are either very specialized or incomplete or out of date or you name it. So it can be it's a bit of a wilderness, but there's an incredible array of riches there. I'm also marginally involved in a project at Esri to kind of curate a more authoritative subset of those, so called Living Atlas of the World, so that people can, rather than wander endlessly in the wilderness, people can go to the atlas and find maps that they can be confident are reasonably up to date and authoritative and usable. I'd like to show you another app that's a work in progress that we're really excited about. So we've worked with 2 organizations on a prototype of this application, which we've called GeoBlog, but we're renaming Map Journal. So we worked with Wildlife Conservation Society on this story, and we worked with James Fallows at Atlantic Monthly, who's also working with Kai Ridsdal at Marketplace on American Futures effort. But the idea here is to more kind of richly integrate and accommodate multimedia content in a format that can accommodate longer form text. So the map tour I just showed you, if the text gets really long, it starts to obscure the photograph, and it just isn't, that format really just isn't designed for a more kind of full article. So we did this for Wildlife Conservation Society to help call attention to this terrible ongoing problem of elephant poaching in Africa. So as I scroll or click down through the story, each item in the story can be associated with its own web map from ArcGIS Online. So we did a lot of work with Wildlife Conservation Society to take and customize maps that they've developed and present them in narrative form. So this item enables users to click to see a density map of forest elephant populations in 2002 versus 2011. And you can see, just in less than 10 years, the density of elephants has declined pretty dramatically. And you can also see see that, compare the road network to elephant populations, and you can tell that if an elephant is closer to a road, he or she is at greater risk. But then guarded parks, so you can see that it does make a difference to have protected areas that are truly protected, because
Can you, I'm sorry, just with regard to that view right there, can you go back and forth in time now with that overlay of the parks to see whether or not there's a decrease of elephants in the protected areas?
No. I think you could set it up so that you could do that, but in this case we just presented it more or less sequentially. But I think you get the idea here that this can be a really rich way of telling a story. And we also wanted to go kind of from macrocosm to microcosm. So we did these maps of kind of diagramming the illegal ivory trade that's feeding primarily a huge and growing market in China. We wanted to focus on an event that the federal government held to burn its ivory stock, so to help call attention to the crisis. And then we also worked with Save the Elephants. We wanted to tell the story of an individual elephant. And so we got in contact with them, and they had this heart-wrenching story of, they found this elephant named Khadija, and she had been shot up, and so they tranquilized her and patched her up, put a radio collar on her and let her go, and then tracked her movements. And you can then click to see where she went. But then within 2 or 3 weeks, she was shot and killed, and her ivory was, her head was essentially chopped off and her ivory taken. So, and then we end with a kind of appeal for people to donate.
May I ask, did they cut her tusks off before? Once they patched her up, did they take her tusks off at that point?
No, these were, of course, poachers.
Right, no. Because often what they do is they'll remove the tusks from the elephant so that they are not killed for their tusks.
Apparently that doesn't work. I'm not sure.
That's the reason I was asking
that.
is whether or not they then cut off the head to get even the remaining tusks that might sit in their head.
No, her tusks were not cut off before. Apparently they do that sometimes with rhinos, that they can remove the horns of it.
Right.
But elephants, apparently they're not viable without their...
Oh, okay.
At any rate, we are currently developing this into an app with a builder function. By the way, this was customized for the dark gray background, which looks a little gloomy. I think most versions of this story wouldn't have that. But what we're doing is, and this will come out in July, and we'll call it Map Journal. We'll have a couple of different layout options. One will have a kind of floating panel that's a little bit transparent, and you'll be able to do lots of things. There's a full text editor within it. Photos and videos can be accommodated. We're also changing that so that this main media window, which in this version accommodates only maps, will also accommodate images or videos. So in that case, you can really go back and forth. So you might have a video here and an interactive map over here on the side panel, and then switch back and forth as you go through the story. So this is going to be, I think, a really exciting way to tell all sorts of stories in the future, near future. And another thing you'll be able to do as an author is determine whether you want to do it as a blog, in which case the latest post would go at the top, or like this one as a kind of packaged narrative, which would be more in like a series of items or chapters. So that's essentially what we're all about. As I mentioned, we've got more and more organizations using these apps for various purposes. Another thing I should have mentioned is as we make these apps more robust, we also work to make them fully responsive, so they work on small screens, especially cell phones. So this one, for instance, sure I can. Well, if I were able to shrink this, it would automatically, the format would change to accommodate, so that it can be used easily on cell phones.
I have a question. This looks like it could be incredibly useful for some research, actually, that we're doing as well. And one of the things we're thinking about is trying to figure out how to dynamically display information as we're kind of gathering different types of data. And so I was wondering if you could suggest, if we're going to go into the field to do some interviews and maybe some site visits, and I have a sense that it might be interesting to put together some kind of a map, but I'm not really quite sure what. We're still working on the exact research questions and the approach. What should we think about capturing and with what kind of tools? I mean, it seems like you can do the basic kind of mapping with an app on the phone, or what would you sort of suggest as a sort of open way of collecting data for the story?
That's a little bit different from what we know, the normal or the typical use of story maps. But I think, one way to do it would be to just create essentially create a series of questions or items that would populate a spreadsheet for each. So you're saying that you'd want to map each interview that you do in the field, or?
Well, as an example, so one of the things we're thinking about is trying to track the flow of information in a community. So that might be one thing, to try and actually track how it goes from source to person, or it could be just people's movement through a community. I'm not completely sure.
Yeah,
I mean, it is basically storytelling. I don't think it's that radically different of a use.
Right.
I think one of the things you can do is if you were to geotag every interview, and then if you were to find correlations, for example, and find that people that responded to questions in one way, and then you were to look at some type of a geo-reference to determine whether or not the people who are surveyed in an urban area are answering a specific number of questions differently than people in a rural area. For example, we're looking at the issue of resilience. And so do we find through that questioning, I don't know exactly what the questions will be, but whether or not people in certain areas are more adaptive, than people in other areas. But geographic reference tied to, for example, relationship to areas that are damaged, or areas that relationships that have been previously damaged, even though not damaged this time. So georeferencing it relating to events could be one way of.
And again, that would just be, you would suggest just using, on a smartphone.
Yeah, well, one thing that your question brings to mind is an item that's high on our wish list that we haven't actively started to work on yet, but actually just been trading a bunch of emails with telling you about this in the last couple of days, is to do a crowdsourcing application where, and the idea would be, and I've actually started to create some mock-ups for it. The idea would be that you as the author would be able to customize essentially a simple form, so that people you could make this available via a website, and anybody could go to the site and fill out that form with some basic information. So, what newspaper do I read, or what channels do I watch, or what issues do I care about, and then submit that form, and it would automatically start to populating that. So that's something we're pretty excited about.
When do you think that you'll be developing?
Who knows? I don't want to make any promises, but I'd like to think within 6 months to a year. We're, of course, in that happy but sometimes frustrating situation of having so many opportunities and not nearly enough people. But it can take a while to get to where we want to go.
Well, if you're looking for an opportunity to pilot something like that, we might be able to provide you the place and space and individuals to do that.
Great. Okay. Well, that's a definite possibility. You saw an example of that with the elephant story.
Right.
We worked with WCS to essentially help pilot that new storytelling tool. So that is a possibility. One thing we did learn that the hard way is that sometimes a very high-profile prototype can be dangerous. So having Jim Fallows publishing on a platform that was still in a kind of alpha state with lots of bugs was a little hair raising sometimes, because he'd be right against deadline and something would break, and he said, "What happened to my map?" So with that caveat,
we have somebody who can relate to that.
I have one question, maybe so that it's but I mean, in the organization, we definitely, I think, do not have people that are know-noting our GIS or our GIS experts. But we still are very interested in doing things like this because they're very, very interesting for us. And especially this one, that's one of the reasons why I contacted you right now to come to do this. It's something that relates a lot with the type of news storytelling that we're trying to do within the organization. So how does it normally work? Like, organization come to you and say, I want to do this, I can get you the data, and you do a contract and you do it for them? Or what kind of type of collaboration do you have with organizations?
Right. Well, there are all sorts. There's a number of different models. And by the way, we produce story maps for really kind of two purposes and two audiences. One is maybe more traditionally is to enable and urge the kind of more traditional audience for Esri or GIS users to tell their stories to the public. It kind of drives me crazy that people are doing this. And I talk a lot when I give speeches and things about data being sequestered or enslaved within an organization, and that it's effective as in its slave state.
We were just talking about that yesterday.
but if that data is emancipated and to serve a larger community,
You're giving us good vocabulary here.
to really push the metaphor, and part of that emancipation process is teaching that data to be a good citizen. So you can't just, I mean, there are open data efforts and they're great, but a lot of data isn't very easy to understand or use to a non-specialist if you just release the data. So what we're trying to do with these user experiences is to make the data, tell stories with it so that it's more accessible and usable. So some organizations already have GIS deeply embedded with them, and so there are specialists who then learn how to tell the stories with their data. There are other organizations that don't know GIS at all, which we think we can equally serve. They may not be using maps like that Twisty Roads one that reflect an analysis, but they might be able to geotag photos like this and put them on a base map and not use GIS data at all. Or they might find data published on ArcGIS Online that would be of interest and useful to them and publish them into stories. And then there are also organizations who have a specific need, and this is a phenomenon that's just starting to grow, who come to us and say, hey, we really like your story maps, but we need help producing a special series of maps that we can then, or Esri can publish in the story map, and that's a contractual arrangement. But in terms of the second model, it really means that any organization can, with an ArcGIS Online account, create and publish story maps that are accessible to everybody. And even private individuals can use a kind of basic free version of ArcGIS Online to publish story maps, but there's limited the capabilities are somewhat more limited. Now, the use of ArcGIS Online can take some time to learn and understand. But what we're working with the reason we're doing these builder apps is to make it as easy as possible, so people don't have to, who just want to geotag photos and videos and create narratives like this, don't need to even touch ArcGIS Online's web mapping APIs and things like that. But so there's
something like this that you created.
Hmm?
Would something like this that you created, for example, that sort of a lay person would be able to do, or you need to have some understanding of?
This with this builder function, and I know about GIS, but I'm not a hands-on GIS user. I can publish these very quickly. In fact, last fall I gave a talk at MIT or near MIT, and before I gave a talk, I wandered around the MIT campus with my iPhone, and right there in front of everybody, I went to Flickr, and I clicked on that collection of photos. It automatically populated the story, and so I essentially had a story map in 30 seconds. Although that said, we find that, of course, anybody who knows the editorial process knows that you don't publish a good story in 30 seconds. That there's a lot of back and forth in it and iterative work. There are also various technological tricks that you can play with in order to keep data up to date. So one of the things we've experimented with is using things like Google Docs, so that people can edit a spreadsheet in more or less real time and have the results displayed in a story map that can change with every edit. We haven't done a lot of those things, but we're gaining experience with that sort of thing. And it's the sort of thing we love to learn from what partners are doing, this kind of stuff. Are there other questions?
But this is great.
Sure.
Actually, I have one more question.
Okay.
Do all of your maps live on this site, or do people, once you publish it, do you have ownership and you create your own site, or I'm just wondering where all.
Well,
we can put it on the Internews website, is that?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So there can be several. I'm not technical, so forgive me if my language is awkward.
I know.
And my answer is, but you can. I mean, for all of these, if you've got web developers on your staff, you can opt to download the source code and host it on your own server. So that's one option.
Okay.
Another is to embed these into your website. And that's been happening a bunch, and in fact there's an embed version of some of these apps. For this one, for instance, I might even try it, see it. The embedded version gets rid of the header. Let me just see if, I probably won't be able to remember how to do it. I think this probably won't work, but worth a try. Nope, it didn't work. At any rate, you can embed it. You can also, of course, these things can be reskinned. So one of the things I didn't show in the edit capability is you can get rid of the Esri logo up there and add another logo, and give it, color it so that it reflects the look and feel of another website, and then link to it and have it appear as if it's fully part of that, the host organization's website, even if it's hosted in the cloud by Esri. So there are lots of different options. So Amnesty worked with a group. This is another potential option for you. There's a really neat little development group called Blue Raster that are in Roslyn, and we're in pretty regular touch. And so Amnesty was really interested in this format, but of course this again is the GeoBlog format. It wasn't published yet. So they worked with Blue Raster, who took our code and kind of refined it and helped Amnesty build this story that I find pretty elements of which I find pretty disturbing. That was their point, of course. So they've got, included in here are some, obviously they've got detailed imagery of where the strikes occurred and eyewitness accounts. And there are 2 or 3 examples of eyewitness accounts saying that a drone strike would occur, say here, a crowd would gather to help the wounded, and then a second group strike would happen in the same spot. I'd like to think that our government doesn't do the kind of stuff that terrorist organizations do, but apparently, according to those eyewitness accounts, that can happen. So this is, just a really powerful use of the GeoBlog format, and they've done some others too. They did this one of human rights abuses in Nigeria, using, again, obviously this is the map tour format, so a different sort of presentation, but it's powerful.